Everybody, welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, we asked our listeners to provide us with some questions so that we can talk about the stuff you guys are interested in hearing about. And as usual, our listeners have come through and then some. So I hope you guys like listener question shows because you're getting a bunch of them.
Well, we also have plenty of shows to provide over the next few weeks. So it's good that we've got a bunch of questions. So if you do not hear your question in this episode, you may hear it in later episodes, or maybe just ask first. That's really the key to getting on the show, is to be at the top of the list.
Yes. How do you order the questions? Is there some sort of editorial process? First come, first served has typically been how that has worked. So that's fine. And if you don't love listener question shows for whatever reasons, don't worry. We're still doing a bunch of the game rewatches and all that kind of stuff. There's going to be plenty of stuff to talk about over the next month or so. And I think we are providing more content at this point than people can mathematically fit into a given day or week. So, if you don't care for an episode, skip it. Another one will be coming in about 17 minutes. So should be fine.
What fantastic advice for you to give the listeners. You know what? My advice, stop what you're doing, including listening to the show. Just stop listening to this show. Good job, Tom.
I'm just saying, download it on 3 to 4 different devices, and then you don't have to listen to it on all of them. That's all. That's a very helpful thing you can do for us. First one from @GRL Sports7. What are your thoughts on how the portal is currently affecting players right now that are on the team being poached by other schools? And on social media, fans going crazy. It's got to be crazy for a team that plays in 3 weeks to deal with all this. Ohio State fans are so toxic. Crying emoji. Tony, are Ohio State fans so toxic? Or is this just every fan base and you're just the worst voices are being amplified? He asked leadingly.
Well, I just thought it was interesting that you added that part about Ohio State fans are so toxic, because that was not part of the question.
It was part of the question.
It is social media and us being on the Ohio State sphere that we see all of the negativity that gets put out there, and the pleas from parents saying, please stop cussing at our kids and telling our kids about how terrible they are and at football and at life and all of these things. And I don't know that it's all that different from other major college football programs. I do think the larger problem is the constant having to recruit your own players, that sort of thing. Once you get them in the fold, that to me is that's going to drive some college coaches to the NFL, because I've already signed this free agent. Why do I need to sign them again next year? Or why do I need to? It's not just a yearly thing. It's almost like a daily thing. I have to make sure that this kid is happy here. And that's really tough to do in a difficult environment, a competitive environment where generally, Tom, in the olden days, if you weren't happy, you worked to get better and to get on the field. Now, if you're not happy, you can go in the portal. Now, the danger there is if you recruit from the portal, those are some of the kids that you're getting. The guys who are like, it was too hard at my last place. And so now you expect this kid to work super hard at your place. I just think there's a lot going on. It's a lot for head coaches to keep up with. The constant recruiting of your own players, I think, is, maybe not answering the question. That's just one of the issues that I have with this. But how does it affect the team right now? There's so much going on with the team. You got the awards circuit. You've got we didn't think we were in playoffs, and now we are. I still think that's an issue that you have to come back from and get everybody re-engaged. I almost don't think the social media and the fans are much of a distraction right now, because players have enough distractions as it is.
Players definitely have a lot of distractions right now, but I mean, to your point on the free agency, and you sign a free agent, and this is basically with the portal the way it is and the transfer windows the way they are right now. It's basically like these guys have an opt-out in their contracts every 6 months. So it's just, you sign a guy and you can, the Mets just went through this with Jacob deGrom, and they signed Jacob deGrom to an extension, but then he had an opt-out after the 2022 season. So he has a contract, but then he can leave in the middle of the contract because the contract says he can. functionally every player in FBS football has an opt-out every 6 months at this point. Like December 5th to January 16th or 18th, whatever it is, you can opt out and move on to the portal. And I think this is something that, combined with NIL, it's, this is a bunch of stuff in college football all changing all at once. And we're still sort of in the chaotic interim period where I think this is ultimately going to settle down to a certain degree, because you're not going to just, at some point you're going to see that there are so many guys who are left when when the music stops playing, there are a bunch of guys standing without a chair. You're going to have some cautionary tales develop. You're going to have, I think you're already starting to see some of the cautionary tales with NIL, like Texas A&M spent, reportedly $30 million, and you can believe that number or not. But that worked out to about $6 million a win. So I'm not sure that math worked out great for them. And you look at some of the other big, chasing the bag schools, and Miami, how's that working out for you? Not great. Texas, how's that working out for you? Not great. And so I think this is one of these things that you're going to find an equilibrium at some point, and they will probably end up having, putting some additional restrictions in place, as they did with the transfer windows, as they sort of figure this stuff out and they figure out workarounds on a lot of this stuff. So, sport-wide, I don't think this is going to be chaos from now until the heat death of the universe. This is sort of the natural byproduct of the people in charge of the sport being completely reckless and irresponsible with it for decades and saying, no, we can't do any of this. And then when change came, sort of throwing up their hands and going, fine, you want it? Fine, try it with no rules, see how you like that. And so that's where we are right now, and now they're going to start reining this in eventually. As far as the team in itself, yeah, I mean, it's crazy right now, but it's been a lot less crazy for Ohio State on that front at the moment than it has been for other schools. Alabama has, at one point I saw 19 guys in the portal. Ohio State has 2. I mean, and that's part of that is Ohio State's in the playoff. So if you are a player who's thinking, maybe I'll go, maybe I won't, why wouldn't you stick around and maybe get a free trip to Atlanta and maybe get a free trip to the national championship game? Maybe get a ring. I mean, you're going to, you have the option to transfer after the season is over. And I think you will see more guys from Ohio State going into the portal. It's not just going to be Jalen Johnson and Taraja Mitchell, but you will see more guys. But right now, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some guys who are in that locker room who are planning on transferring, and some guys who are in that locker room who are thinking about maybe transferring, and we'll see how playing time goes, or we'll see how NFL draft declarations go, or whatever. But do you think Georgia is a completely, tumult-free locker room? Do you think everyone in the Georgia locker room is perfectly happy with where they are? Do you think everyone in the Michigan locker room is perfectly happy with where they are right now? No, I suspect they are probably not. So this is something that's probably hitting, it's probably hitting some programs a little harder than others, but I don't know that it's hitting Ohio State substantially harder than other places.
I do wonder what things would look like right now if Ohio State was number 5 instead of 4, and how many guys would be in the portal right now, and how many guys have been thinking about the portal, because obviously we've talked about start at 10 and go 1 or 2, start at 10 players transferring and go, 1, 2, 3, either direction there. And that's probably where you're going to end up with how many guys leave. But I've also compared this a little bit to like senioritis, where guys start to like look forward to going somewhere else. And now it's like, well, I'm going to be here for another month. And how much are you going to get out of those guys during practice? Are you going to get, what you need out of those? And those are the guys that I guess you're going to have to move on from them to somebody else during the course of camp. If there are any of those guys through the course of bowl camp, other players will rise up, and that's, those are the guys that you start to rely on more. But I do think just any of the Ohio State players looking at transferring, talking with other players, the tampering that goes on, and not just Ohio State, like nationally. Once you start picturing yourself somewhere else, like the NFL, it's hard to come back to reality, because you know what? Reality is still a choice for these guys. Like, they can choose to stay in the mindset of I'm going over here later on. I don't need to come back to this reality. And sometimes the difference is, you know what, I could have a month off, or I could spend this month in grueling practice and workouts and all that stuff getting ready for a game that I don't think we're going to win, that sort of thing. And, you know, you weigh those two, and still, as you said, Tom, only 2 guys have opted out. Only 2 guys have hit the portal at this point. And so, it is crazy. It's a crazy time, Tom, but also it's pretty entertaining from a national scope, because when you look at everything going on, you see, let's take Wisconsin, for instance. New coach, new offensive coordinator, Graham Mertz hits the portal. And so they're going to get a good quarterback in the portal. And that, like, if they get, say if I put Hudson Card with Wisconsin and that kind of offense that was formerly at North Carolina. So you've got Hudson Card running Drake May's offense with Wisconsin's defense and Luke Fickell as head coach. Is that something that sounds interesting to you?
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at how quickly USC went from completely irrelevant nationally to very relevant nationally, and it wasn't fixed overnight, you know, to the point that they got into the playoff, but they got to the Pac-12 championship game, and they looked for about a quarter like they were going to win the Pac-12 championship game. And that's a program that had been like nothing for a long time. So yeah, the addition of Phil Longo at Wisconsin is definitely a game changer there. You mentioned the 2 Ohio State players who are transferring. Roger Mitchell's staying through the playoff. So Jalen Johnson's the only one who's actually leaving immediately. And I do think there's, you know, we may see a starter or someone who's in a conversation for starter transfer after the season. That's a possibility. You may see more than one. That's a possibility. But I think, you know, in the number 10 that we're talking about, I think you're seeing a lot more guys who are getting Jalen Johnson level snaps or Taraja Mitchell level snaps, probably transferring out, rather than like, hey, the whole offensive line's leaving for some reason. That's not, Ohio State is not at a level of the sport where you're probably losing many starters. That's something that's more like the best player on your MAC team is leaving for greener pastures. The guys at Ohio State are leaving for spots in the MAC. We just watched the Georgia-Missouri game for one of the upcoming episodes, and it's like, oh, Mookie Cooper, look at him, good for him. And Mookie Cooper was not someone who was in any danger of cracking the starting rotation at Ohio State, and then he's starting for Missouri. Sam Weglus was a walk-on at Ohio State, and now he's a standout wide receiver at Ohio University. So that's kind of the direction that the bulk of the Ohio State transfers are going to go. You could lose a big name. You saw Jamison Williams transfer to Alabama a couple years ago. Joe Burrow transferred to LSU. This is not exclusively guys who are 5th on the depth chart or anything like that, but I think the majority of guys are going to be people who, if you just stop the average Ohio State fan on the street, they'd be like, who is that? That's not CJ Stroud or JT Tuimoloau. I don't know who that is. So
I still wonder at what point does NIL purchase a starter from Ohio State? And really, we have not seen that. That's going to be an issue moving forward if that can happen. At this point, it hasn't. And as you said, you're losing guys that just want more playing time. And that's been the case forever.
All right, Tony. Next one, we're going to get a little bit of a 2-for-1 here from @Eric6.drcom1. How long will it take before Ohio State's NIL collective wakes up and figures out a way to compete for the top players in high school and the transfer portal? And from @Columbian_23_ what's the truth with this NIL stuff? Are we really behind? And if so, will we adjust and fix this? And Tony, life is all about timing, isn't it? We're reading these questions, and a statement from Gene Smith, Ohio State athletic director, has just hit our inboxes. Tony, I think Gene Smith is broadly agreeing with some of the concerns.
Yeah, the fact that the Ohio State athletic director has to come out and let everybody know about, hey, there are 3 collectives that people can give money to and help Ohio State recruit. I think that's a significant step forward in answering the question. Apparently, we should just put Gene in as part of the podcast here because he's answering the listener questions for us. And I can just go ahead and read it basically. There's never been a more exciting time to be a fan of the Ohio State Buckeyes. Excellence within our programs and remarkable experiences for our student athletes will always be the standard at Ohio State, while competing for championships, academic excellence, and graduating and preparing for life after sports are our goals. Recent guidance updates recent guidance updates from the NCAA clarified how schools can be involved with name, image, and likeness activities of student athletes. Many of our Buckeyes are taking advantage of this, and we are committed to supporting our current and future student athletes while building strong competitive programs. We welcome your help in keeping Ohio State at the top of the college athletics landscape. 3 quote-unquote collective organizations that are helping our Buckeyes maximize NIL opportunities are in operation now and seeking additional support. They are Cohesion, a proud sponsor of the Ohio State Athletics, the Foundation, and the O Foundation. And then Gene signs it, the Ohio State Department of Athletics thanks Buckeye Nation for its support. The fact that you have the athletic director for Ohio State coming out and saying, hey, help us stay at the top. I would say it implies that Ohio State is at the top, but he actually says it. So, but the fact that you have to come out and say, hey, you know what, we need some help. And I do think, Tom, is having 3 collectives, like you're splitting the pot, aren't you? Isn't that an issue? And when one of them is named Cohesion and there are still 2 others, like how cohesive are these collectives actually?
Yeah, one is called Cohesion and one is called The Collective. And it's like, well, I mean, there's other ones. So how cohesive are you really being? I think you're start of seeing colleges maybe run into different camps and different. I mean, this is I think a more public version of the booster wars that you will sometimes see going on. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, just Google Auburn football and you will see what I'm talking about, or Texas football and you will see what I'm talking about, or Alabama football before Nick Saban got there and you will see what I'm talking about. You're going to have different camps, and you know, there's a bunch of different reasons for that. And some people love being the face of the thing, and I can't be the face of the thing if this other guy's the face of the thing, so now I'm going to be a face of this thing. Like, there are reasons that people are involved in this stuff beyond just, I want the team to win football games. So I do think there has to be a little bit of concern of, you know, if you have 3 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks, and if you have 3 collectives, you have no collectives, or, you know, how are you dividing your efforts in too many different directions? Could you be more effective with less redundancy? I think all of those things are possible. Also, this is not something that is just happening at Ohio State. This is something that's happening probably in most to all different programs that have NIL collectives at this kind of scale. There are plenty of places where you have different you know, factions within the NIL thing. And I think this all goes back to, we are still in the very early days of NIL, and we're in, you know, Gene Smith there talking about the fact that, well, the NCAA just clarified the rules on this. Like, they're all just kind of making it up as they go and sort of figuring it out. And I think eventually you're going to find this is going to all sort of settle in a certain place. It's very much like the transfer portal, where you have so many guys going all at once. Eventually, like, you're going to have the system is going to sort itself out, and people are going to realize, like, hey, a lot of the people who go in there don't end up getting someplace better, or guys end up transferring 3 times, and you don't want to be that guy either. This is going to sort itself out over time. There will be new guardrails put into place. There will be new things perhaps clarified or opened up. I mean, right now it's still a little Wild Westy to me, but I think that's something that is going to sort of resolve itself over time.
Just the simple sentence of this portion of the Gene Smith statement. Recent guidance updates from the NCAA clarified how schools can be involved. Like, the guidance has been updated and clarified how schools can be involved. The rules have not changed. They've just had to reiterate what you can and can't do, because they're still trying to figure it out as we go on. And it's like, oh, turns out this is technically legal. So since it's technically legal, everybody can do it. And you're just pushing against the fence to find the technically unelectrified portions of it. And it's like, okay, we can touch this fence. Hey, everybody, come touch this fence. And now it's like, okay, now we got to get the collectives touching the fence. And then now we can tell them to do what. And you've got a whole bunch of schools just not necessarily even hanging back, but just watching the fools run first. And it turns out those fools, you know, I mean, You can call Texas A&M fools if you want. I think they have looked foolish. So if you look like a fool and you lose like a fool, I guess that makes you a fool. But you also learn from the fools on how to do things better, and maybe Ohio State can do that.
Not the first group of people wearing overalls to shock themselves on an electric fence, I think, is maybe the my takeaway there. Yeah, I think everyone has this is kind of one of these life is all about risk tolerance things where you have people who are a little more YOLO, and the programs that have been a little more YOLO about this are the ones where you kind of like Bruce Springsteen's Glory Days could be their fight song. It's like Texas A&M, Miami, Texas, Tennessee. Like, it's gotten a little, the urgency with which the booster corps has embraced NIL and which the school has maybe been a little more willing to test the fence is probably reflective of the fact that these are schools where, the status quo is very clearly not working, so they want to change it. So you've had those teams maybe go out a little bit out in front and kind of, running point on patrol through the jungle. And, there are other programs, I think, and, Alabama, I think, has had, Alabama is not getting quite as many players as they used to. Ohio State's recruiting is a little off this year. You're some of those, sort of traditional powers where it's sort of been working a lot better over the last 5-10 years. They've been hanging back a little bit more, and you can sell development and you can sell all that kind of stuff because Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama, they put people in the pros, and you can still sell that. And I think it'll be very interesting to look back a couple years from now at the guys, if there's any kind of a database of the guys who got the biggest NIL deals, who went to the Texas A&Ms and the Miamis and the Tennessees and the Texases, versus the guys who went to these sort of quote-unquote traditional development programs like Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama, and what those outcomes looked like. Rankings going in, how much they got, and then, how does that correlate to what the outcome was in terms of whatever, NFL draft position, NFL starts, Pro Bowls, whatever metric you want to use there to measure that. It's way too soon to have any kind of an answer on what that's going to look like. But I think that's going to be something that's going to be very interesting to take a look at down the road. From @DavidHooser1, what part of Georgia's offense do you think will give Ohio State the biggest problems? And, I think to me, looking at some of the similarities that they have with Michigan, where they've got, the big tight ends that they will throw the ball to. They've got a quarterback who's, not as much of a runner necessarily as J.J. McCarthy, but elusive in the same way that J.J. McCarthy is and can extend plays in the same way that J.J. McCarthy does. I think that's probably would be my biggest concern is Georgia's had wide receivers banged up all year and they're starting to get guys back. And it feels like that's probably the biggest concern is some of the similarities between the Georgia offense and the Michigan offense. And the other thing that I think is, people have in their heads, like, this is still Georgia is, Mark Richt and they're running, fullback out of the I, or, running out of the I formation and running between the tackles. And it's like, no, this is a more pass heavy offense. Georgia throws more than they run. Tennessee runs more than they throw. And I think in people's minds, it's completely the opposite. So yeah, I think to me, I think it has to be the Georgia passing offense. And, can the Ohio State defensive backs get guys on the ground? Because if you miss tackles, we have seen watching these games, like, if you don't get them on the ground, they can turn it into big plays. So can they stay with, can they cover, can they get enough pressure on Stetson Bennett to impact him and get him off platform? And can they get guys to the ground when they do complete passes?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. The tight ends will be an issue. I just think his escapability and then the scramble drill aspect of the Georgia offense, which is not a strength of Ohio State's defense, the scramble drills and the receivers break open because a corner or safety peeks into the backfield at the scramble, and now you've got a guy open by 30 yards. I think that is going to be an issue. One of the other things that we'll talk about when we get to the Georgia-Missouri show is I think the Georgia offensive line wore Missouri out through the course of 4 quarters. They were getting bested through a lot of that with Missouri's defense, but I think eventually the offensive line wore them out, and you saw that with the running game as well. So I think they just continue to do what they do, and you look at the box scores and you're like, where is this all coming from? And, I just think they've got a lot of guys, but ultimately it's the tight ends, it's the escapability. And, I don't even know if Ohio State fans need to know who the running backs and the receivers are, because they're all interchangeable. And, it's like, don't worry about one guy. You already know Kendall Milton because of recruiting, and he was an Ohio State target. You'll know that name, but like there's so many different guys that go through there. The names to know are the quarterback, obviously, and the two tight ends. And if you shut those guys down, if you don't hear from the two tight ends, if you don't hear from Brock Bowers and Darnell with Washington, yeah, I think that'd be a pretty good day for Ohio State's defense.
Probably, but I feel like we kind of said the same thing before the Michigan game, and then Cornelius Johnson went off for about 17 catches for 3.2 miles. So,
well, I also wanted to throw Stetson Bennett in that. Like, if we don't hear from those three guys, I just didn't get that quarterback in there.
Yeah, and boy, we'll get to this during the Missouri show, but watching the Oregon game and the Missouri game back to back was just incredibly jarring, because the Georgia offense looked utterly unstoppable against Oregon. And Oregon is a substantially better team than Missouri is this year. And then you get a little bit of pressure on Bennett in the Missouri game, and all of a sudden, again, we'll talk about it, but focus was probably an issue to a certain degree. But, it was like you went from, it looks like the Ohio State offense, where you have seen the Ohio State offense look like a whirling death machine, and then you have seen Ohio State look like they don't know, their shoes are tied together and they don't know how to play football. Like, what? We're playing what today? Oh crap! How many points is that worth? That's what Georgia looked like against Missouri, and we'll talk about it during the next show. We don't need to do both shows right now at the same time. That is my hot take. Let's instead take this one from @VWChadW. Could you run through some scenarios of what could happen in the playoff? How big of an impact to the history of college football could Ohio State versus Michigan be? And, an Ohio State-Michigan national championship. First of all, it is immediately probably the biggest game in the history of the sport. When is the last time, Alabama and Auburn have never played for a national championship, right? When have you had two of the biggest rivals, Texas and Texas A&M, Texas and Oklahoma? Because you don't even have USC and Notre Dame playing for the national championship. I think it becomes one of the most consequential games in the history of the sport. It also, boy, if Ohio State beats Georgia and it's an Ohio State-Michigan national championship game, boy, we have seen the narrative around conferences hinge on one or two, playoff games or one or two bowl games in the past. All the stuff that you hear when it's like, well, Alabama and Georgia, oh, look at that, oh, what a surprise, the SEC dominant again. And if Ohio State and Michigan beat their opponents, then, I think if we're going to be intellectually honest here, we have to have I suppose that means the Big Ten is unquestionably the king of college football. So, we'll see if that happens, but it feels like if that happens, it becomes a very consequential thing. And don't worry, if Michigan and Ohio State both lose, don't worry. Everyone will let you know what that means about the Big Ten. So I think we just need to be intellectually consistent here on what it means, and does this define or does this not define the strength of a conference? The result of one or two games, and whatever we decide is fine, but we need to all agree on it up front, and then we need to have that conversation afterwards.
Does that include bowl games as well, Tom? Just like all of the bowl games?
Yeah, that depends on if the team wants to be there, and we'll let you know if the team wanted to be there after the game's over. I have a feeling Alabama's not going to want to be there in the Sugar Bowl when we retroactively look at playing Kansas State. That feels like that's going to be not a good time in a certain way. But it won't count.
Yeah.
So it's okay.
No, exactly. That's if the desire is not there, it should not. You expunge that from the record, as we all know. I haven't even let myself think about what would an Ohio State Michigan national championship game be like, because it's, when have you thought about it? You've thought about it, but it's just just imagine. It's so you're just 2 games away from that happening, and we can start imagining it. You won't have to imagine it if obviously if those two teams win. I would say, Tom, we probably have seen like Alabama and Auburn play for many national titles because I believe like the Tuscaloosa News would hand out their national championship after the Iron Bowl, stuff like that. You know, so you've had probably 6 or 7 times that those two teams have played for a national title. But rivals like this, to be able to close the season out, it would almost be like, you know what, let's just start playoffs, the 12-team playoff next year, because this is never going to be, you're never going to get anything better than this Final Four. Let's just move on completely and bring in the new era, because the old era has ended right here, and it was unbelievable.
Yeah, I know people are going to be saying, you know, well, Georgia and Alabama, or Alabama and LSU, and like, yeah, okay, maybe, but those are not, you know, the rivalry that was defined as the greatest in the 20th century by ESPN. And
that's Ohio State and Penn State playing each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Penn State winning a playoff game. Tony, Penn State reaching the playoff. Come on. Let's try and live in. Oh, Tennessee and Vanderbilt. Yeah, okay, Tony, great. Yeah, sure. All right, maybe. No, it's just the historical importance of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, and how consistently it's been important in the sport, and how, you know, this is not just like, well, back in the Bo and Woody days, like, what's the most watched regular season game every year? Literally every year, it's Ohio State-Michigan. Like, this is not just we are from Ohio, so therefore we're saying this. It's like, I'm very sorry, this is what the facts are. They are not in dispute. So, yeah, I don't think you could possibly match that. We'll see if Auburn ever gets its act together, and I don't think their current coaching staff is going to be the one to get its act together. So after Hugh Freeze disgraces himself and gets fired in 2 years, whoever comes in after that, maybe you have an Alabama-Auburn national championship at that point. But yeah, until that point, I think Ohio State-Michigan is unquestionably the most consequential. And I mean, how much would be on the line for each of these teams narratively? I mean, think about the difference between Michigan beats Ohio State for the 3rd time in 2 years and wins an undisputed national championship for the first time in 74 years, and is, the kings of the sport, versus, oh, look, Ohio State has gotten Michigan once again when it matters most, and Michigan still hasn't won a national championship an undisputed national championship since 1948, and, congratulations on your Fiesta Bowl trophy, pat you on the head, look, we've got 5 of them. That is as day and night a difference in terms of what the narrative around the sport is, and the narrative around the Midwest is going to be for the next year. And until Michigan wins an undisputed national championship, Ohio State can say, look, we have one for all these different eras. We have one from the BCS era. We have one for the playoff era, and now we have 2 from the playoff era. That I think will, that becomes a program-defining game for both programs, plus the national championships on the line, plus it's maybe the most watched game in the history of the sport. I mean, that's just insane to try and think about.
It's a touchdown celebration for the Big Ten, no matter what happens. If that is the matchup that you get, you can celebrate that. The Big Ten will celebrate that. But yeah, the ability to cancel out a loss to Michigan is something that you've never had before. And I mean, maybe Iowa or Purdue has had it in the last 2 years playing Michigan in the conference championship game. I don't believe they have had that opportunity, but this is totally different, obviously, to just take back the bragging rights. You only get to have the bragging rights for 6 weeks, something like that. And then it's like, you're done with these. I hope you had fun with them. And then you just kind of, you start the clock over again in terms of this many days since they lost, because you don't want it to get into triple digits or quadruple digits. And that's where Ohio State is headed. So I still think this is one of those where making it to the championship game is an incredible accomplishment. Like, Ohio State limped there in the 2020 season. Making it to the national championship game for Ohio State in this season, incredible win against Georgia. If you were to do that, you should be super proud of beating Georgia, but you better not lose to Michigan.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And Michigan is getting, you look at the point spreads, Tony, and Michigan's getting not quite a bye to the championship game, but they certainly have the more favorable matchup. They have a team that would be a double-digit underdog against every other team in the playoff field. So I'm sure Georgia's thrilled about that. But yeah, this is one of those. Let's tie it back to the NIL thing. Like, what is the level of enthusiasm that the NIL collective will receive in terms of support from people if Ohio State is the national champion versus has lost to Michigan for the third time in 2 years, and if it's a multi-score defeat again? The level of enthusiasm of players to stay in the program, and the old political polling is this, is the yada 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 on the right track or the wrong track? Like the right track versus wrong track will hinge entirely on that game and for Ohio State, and yeah, that is about as consequential as it gets.
And the last thing, Tom, before we go, just what do you think about Max Duggan versus Michigan?
I don't think it's going to go great, is what I think. That feels like Michigan is going to. It feels like it's going to be every other game that Michigan has played. Seemingly, it's going to be It feels a lot like we're going to be Michigan Purdue 2, where they'll move the ball and they'll look good at times, and then eventually Michigan will just sort of strangle the life out of them. That is just. I don't think they've got the weapons to really hang with Michigan.
Yeah, he's going to need to play that entire game, and he's a guy that takes a beating at times and still gets up. But looking forward to seeing that one, and of course, looking forward to seeing all of the playoff games, and maybe even once it's all done, seeing Ohio State versus Michigan for the national championship. But we've got some time before we get there. Anything else, Tom, before we go?
That's it.
That is it. And what did we get through here? A host of maybe 5 questions. So yeah, we've still got plenty more shows coming. But again, we're not just going to throw all of these listener question shows at you. There's stuff happening. We'll talk about things like that. And obviously, we've got a rewatch of the Georgia-Missouri game, which very interesting. And look forward to that. Look for that this weekend. And of course, we will have our probably a live Friday show on youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle as well, that we will try to make that happen. So I want to thank you all for joining us. As always, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member, say hello to us there on the message board. And then, of course, as I said, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle to find all of our videos, podcasts, live streams, interviews, all those sorts of things. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys later.